Again, welcome to Hopkins. I'm this guy here, Andreou. I'm a professor here in the Electrical Engineering Department. Also, I'm the co-founder of the Center of Language and Speech Processing. I have to say, I'm a little bit out of it this morning because yesterday I was in University of Southern California for an NSF visit, ERC review visit, and my flight was canceled at noon. You know, all the flights through Denver were canceled. So I had to just spend the night spend the whole afternoon, night in the airport, and I flew back on a red eye. I was delayed. I came home probably 9 o'clock, took a shower, and I'm back here to give you the presentation. So if I don't sound coherent, it's because I didn't get much sleep, for the last 2 days. But actually I saw a lot of exciting things there, and this is, I won't get into the prostheses, which actually were inspired by the cochlear prosthesis, So what we are doing here in the Center for Language and Speech Processing, we are trying to understand how the human system works to process speech and language, and actually how to apply this knowledge to help people and to make money for those who actually have good ideas. So this is roughly the outline of my talk. I will. It depends how it goes and how much time we have. I will spend more or less time on it, but I want to give a sense of what it is that the human system does and how does it relate to real-world applications, okay? To things that we actually are interested in doing today, such as automatic speech recognition and so on. And my talk today, and I think probably you've seen this the presentation this morning on perception. Mine is gonna be more on the production side. So let me first describe the kinds of things that the kind of speech technologies that we're interested in really working on. So the speech technologies, the application domain falls into two major classes. The first class is a class that deals with precise restitution of information, And what does it mean, precise restitution of information? In telephony, you call someone and you want to talk to someone. You want the other person to hear your voice. You don't want the other person to hear a digital synthesized voice that sounds like a computer speaking to you, okay? You really want precise restitution of the information, the same as hearing aids, the same as cochlear implants, for the people that are profoundly deaf or they've got some disease that actually has damaged their hair cells. So you really want to be able to restore human function in the last instance, and that is precise restitution of information. So the next class of problems and applications and technologies that of course are interested is really things that have to do with information extraction from speech. You want to talk to your computer and you want the computer to understand you. Well, there is an algorithm somewhere and some hardware and some system, some architectures there that actually you want it to do automatic speech recognition. So you're not really precisely restituting what you're saying. The computer couldn't care less who you are. Actually, probably shouldn't. You should be able to do this independently of who you are. But you really want to extract the meaning, the words, and the meaning of the words if possible. So the next question that then most probably you would be asking, and why be asking, well, we came to this workshop, we're going to be doing high performance speech recognition, learning, all kinds of video retrieving, whatever you're going to be working on. Why is auditory perception and physiology relevant to speech technologies? Well, part of the answer is just right there. When you're going to make a hearing aid or you're going to make a telephone or a cell phone, the ultimate consumer is a human. And so if the ultimate consumer is a human, you really want to know what the human really feels or thinks about what you're really doing. Again, you don't really care to have even though you could probably do very good coding and reduce the cost of cell calls, you wouldn't want your friend to call you and sound like a robot, on the cell phone, even if the cost of the call would be half the price. It wouldn't be acceptable for you. So that's really what I mean. In principle, actually, you can do that. So the second reason that we're really interested in speech recognition is that in automatic speech recognition, the performance and especially robustness, how really well it works in arbitrary environment, is far below the performance of humans. Here you go. You came in. Someone sitting in front of you, half asleep, with a heavy Greek Cypriot thick accent here, and probably you're making out, about 90% of what I'm trying to say. Of course, you have your eyes and you're reading on the board. That's what I mean. You're pretty robust. That's great. Good thing that actually you guys do that. And we humans do that. So how about machines? Well, they are not really pretty. They are not good at that. It's actually pretty terrible. I was again on this visit yesterday, and I saw a remarkable demonstration. This group at USC borrowing ideas from cochlear prosthesis, which is really by now is a very well-established field. They are making retina prosthesis. They are taking completely blind people. They are putting little electrodes in their eyeball. This is for real. And they go there and you can have a person now that can follow a line on the floor blind. You can go through doors and things like that, which is remarkable. A complete blind person can actually restore. Well, the problem is that, and this is really related to that too, well, what happens when the person tries to go between inside and outside? There's a big contrast there in the light illumination. Well, it doesn't work. She just feels like, oh my God, well, because much like speech there too, you don't have the robust technology to really make the machines work in the everyday environments like that we function as humans. So I hope I motivated you why you are interested to really understand human perception. And let's start now with what are the organs of speech production and hearing. Well, where does it all start? Well, it depends whether you want to start on the hearing or you want to start on what produces the signal that we hear. Of course, your speech begins at the speech production apparatus, which is actually pretty unique to humans. The closest animal, the monkeys, which have pretty much brains and ears and kind of anatomy is very similar to humans. They have a very distinct characteristic that does not allow them to actually produce speech, and that is their vocal tract is very short, So that is, they cannot vocalize in the way actually humans can vocalize and produce speech. So this is actually pretty unique. We have machinery here, and we'll spend a few slides examining what are the key components of the machinery. Then we have the ear, the pinna and your ear, and of course you have your cochlea, and then you go to the brainstem and to cochlear nucleus and auditory cortex and all the high-level auditory centers in the brain that are responsible for really making you speak and hear and also develop language. I mean, how does language develop? How did we develop language? Out of these sounds, out of pressure, wave pressure. So, of course, even though I showed this here as a feed-forward network or where information goes upwards, this actually is recurrent. There is loops everywhere. It's a very complex picture of how speech is produced and perceived and that is why deaf people have problems in producing speech, you know, and vice versa. You really need feedback to really actually function. So in the following slides are actually taken from Maureen Stone lab. I really want to really give credit and also I have some videos I'm going to show from Maureen Stone. She's a professor at University of Maryland. She was one of the members of the Center for Language and Speech Processing, but she moved to University of Maryland here in Baltimore, and she's really imaging speech production, the vocal tract, in particular the tongue, and modeling the tongue. So let me actually show you a little video. This is really get an idea of. You ran a lot, I know. I need to plug this in, and if I plug it in, probably you're going to hear it. Let's play again. Well, I cannot. Anyway, it says, let me put the sound higher.
It ran a lot.
It ran a lot. So what you see here actually, this is the tongue. This is a cross section of the tongue. We are looking at a ultrasound image using an ultrasound transducer, and what you actually see, this is really the surface, the tongue, and the in this direction. So this is where the vocal tract begins, and this is really where the lips are somewhere there. And so what you are seeing basically is somewhere here. Of course, the vocal tract continues further down. We'll see diagrams of this, but let me, I wanted to show a couple.
Ran a lot.
So clearly, a key component in speech. A key component in speech production is the tongue. I mean, it is really a very important organ, and it is really a fascinating organ. And this is basically this structure here. And what is really fascinating about it, it has no bones or joints, and it is entirely made out of soft tissue. Actually, one of the ways you can think of the tongue, imagine now that you have a waterbed, and the waterbed has some brain itself, and it can actually move. You know, this is really what the tongue does. Of course, you have the brain controlling the muscles, but this is essentially, it deforms itself, and it moves at the same time. So it is actually, and you're doing that with using a gazillion, I mean, not a gazillion, but, you know, I mean, many muscle groups, you know, to really do that. And you're doing it many times a second, you know, which is amazing, actually, how that can happen, you know. And so, of course, the jaw moving up and down, the lips, motion of the lips are important, but speech production is really primarily done using the articulatory and the motion trajectories of the tongue, okay? I mean, I don't want to go back home and say, oh, the guy told us, forget about everything else. Of course, without the lips, you couldn't tell B and P, okay? And things like that. So, and of course, the nasals depend on the small cavity that we have going to the nose, but it's a key component. So, technically, and it's good to actually bring some technical language here. Technically, the tongue is a muscular hydrostat, and you have other example of muscular hydrostats. The squid, okay, the way the squid moves, you know, it just have you seen? Have you seen the motion of the squid? How they actually? Well, that is really essentially the same thing, except now the water, you know, the function, the squid takes water and deforms itself. Here is the other way around. You kind of deform from inside. And again, no, the same issue. The same issues is basically mostly soft tissue, no bones, no joints, and the key question now that someone needs to address, and actually this is really the subject matter of Maureen's research in some ways, is how do you control the structure? What are can you decompose the muscular groups in the muscles in groups that actually help you control the structure? And yes, you have orthogonal muscle orientation. We'll see in a bit some cross section of the. I think I may be taken out, but if someone is interested, I can show you some other figures. How the muscles actually are intertwined to actually get this three-dimensional motion out of the individual components. And one of the things that is interesting, actually, your tank, the volume is preserved. So much like the waterbed analogy, the volume of the waterbed is preserved. So as you think of the tank, this is kind of a constraint on the system, and maybe a good constraint. Also, the size is constant or pretty constant. I mean, your tank doesn't change size as you speak. I mean, you can try to extend it. But I pull it. I suppose, but not under normal condition. So, if we put all these constraints together, we come to the conclusion that actually speech is produced by actually having this sac called a tongue in the mouth, and by pushing it in some places and pulling it in some other places, you really make it change the shape. And by changing the shape, we do what? We'll see later what we do, but let's see a little bit more about this. I have the figure, which is good actually. I wanted to show you a figure of the anatomy. Again, let me remind you that all these slides are graciously provided by Maureen. Maureen is a collaborator actually, and we're doing some work together. So you can see actually the shape of the tongue, and the two colors, red and purple, are the muscular groups, orthogonal muscular groups that actually control. If you think about it, some of them go like this and some of them go like this. So you actually have orthogonal groups of muscles, red and blue, that actually give control to this sac that we call a tongue. And this is really anatomy pictures, and Maureen now has functional MRI pictures that actually shows the function of the various muscles in real time as you speak, which is really fascinating. They can tag individual muscle groups with different tags, so you can actually get a kind of stain images, fMRI images, dynamic images of the muscles working together. So this is really fascinating work. But I think let me and these are really cross sections. So this is really the same figure that I showed in the movie. This is really how do we really understand how the tongue works, how do we image, how do we relate to speech, how do we relate to the lips. We can actually, she has a very sophisticated setup whereby you can take MRI ultrasound images, and so this is really some of the original work. And basically what happens now, remember the video that I showed, it looked like this, where you have the lips, you have the tongue, you have the palate somewhere here. And so what happens, this structure here will move and change this structure here. This is really the vocal tract. This is a tube. Think of this structure as a tube from the old days of Helmholtz, We know that there is resonances. We're going to see some of that later, the idealized models, but I just want to give you the sense of why we hear what we hear when we speak. And so as you change this surface, one of the surfaces of the tube, the other being fixed, being the palate, the shape of the tube changes, the size changes, the length changes, the constraints becomes multiple lengths, and so that really gives you the resonances, and the dynamic changes in resonances will ultimately yield the fundamental speech units that we actually use to synthesize speech. Now, this is really images to see the subtle changes, or these are static images, but this is really run and rank. What you see actually, it is really a 3D reconstruction of the tank. In actually, it looks like a tank. Okay, so can someone tell me how these two vocalizations differ in the shape of the tank? Can anybody see anything subtle? It's subtle actually, but it makes a remarkable. It makes a difference between N and G. Okay, when you actually articulate those sounds. Well, okay. So first of all, and if I were to say run, it's more curved, and rank, it's a bit more extended. It's very subtle. I mean, you get the same features in the middle. I mean, it's you get this deep there. The tongue goes up to the palate in the front side, but it's a little bit more clumped and for run, and a little bit more elongated for rank. So if I actually were to, and there is videos with this, but unfortunately I don't have the videos in my presentation. If I actually were to really show the surface of the tongue, how it evolves as you actually say, for example, I run a lot. You see actually that it depends. Let me skip this because there's another story I have to tell you before I explain that. That slide should have been there. I take some slides out, so that kind of. Let me now say how you actually use this tongue to produce sound. So this is really the physics 01. This is really what I was saying earlier. We have basically a uniform tube, and if you have a uniform tube and the velocity of sound is about 350 meters per second, or 35,300 centimeters per second, and we have a tube of length L, there is an equation that you probably learned in some physics class sometime, somewhere, that basically gives us the resonances of the tube in the frequency as a function of the length of the tube, and as a function of the order, and as a function of the velocity of sound. Now, this equation refers to a very simple cavity where you have a tube that is closed on one side. This is really when you solve the wave equation. These are the boundary conditions, and basically we can see now how we can actually change the length of the tube and produce resonances in the amplitude. This would be, for example, a very simple tube-like resonator that you send there. And now, which is really what I have here, so if you actually were to plot this equation, find the resonances for that structure, what you see is that in a frequency axis, you're going to see now resonances, excitations, which are multiple of n. Nu is the parameter, basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And that is really for an ideal resonator of this sort. Now, this particular data refer to a resonator that has a length of 17 centimeters, which is really, something like that, which is a small vocal tract, okay? So this is really, if you had a small vocal tract that just had this shape, what you're gonna get basically is something, a resonance at 500 hertz, at 1,000 hertz, at 1,500 and 2,500 and so on, multiple 2 nu minus 1, okay? 1, 3, 5, and so on, okay? Now, of course, as you remember from the video, and maybe this is another good point to play the video one more time, as you remember from this video,
It ran a lot.
good thing that our vocal tract is not
Ran a lot.
is not just a tube, but actually it's a more complex structure, because if it was just a tube that has that is terminated in one side and open on the other side, Dirichlet and Neumann boundary conditions for those who like physics, we wouldn't be able to speak. Okay, so how does what we have translate to speech sounds? And one of the earliest work by Wakita, who basically says, okay, let's take a tube, but instead of making it uniform, let's make it have a cross-section that corresponds to steady-state vowels that we actually produce. So let's say you go to Maureen's lab, and Maureen says, say ah, you say ah for 5 minutes, just 1 minute. She takes the ultrasound, takes a cross section, and says, aha, your vocal tract shape looks like this, okay? And what kind of sound does a resonator that has a cross section that looks like this? Remember, this is the ideal resonator. This is in comparison what you have in the human system, and then you go back, you compute the resonances. It's not going to be the simple equation. You have to solve the wave equation using the appropriate boundary conditions, etc., etc. It's doable. It's actually, it actually translates to a few matrix transformations where you can break your problem into little domains and you match the boundary conditions. At the end of the day, it's a linear problem. You just multiply a big matrix with the input and the output, you get the output, and that's basically how you solve it. So when you do that for R, you get something that actually looks like this. So basically it tells you that you have a resonance for it's all a function of the absolute position of the resonances. Remember, it's a function of the length of the tube, okay? The structure in the resonances depends on the cross-section area of the resonator. So you have to admit that this structure is similar to this in that there is resonances, but these resonances have a much more complex structure as a result of the complicated cross-section of the tube. Now, when you speak, what's happening? This is not stationary, but it changes dynamically as you speak, changes many times a second. So now you have this complex resonator with these particular resonances, and that actually correspond to the elementary speech sounds. Think of it, another way of thinking of it is like a tube, like an instrument, like a wind instrument, where you actually you play your flute, and by controlling where the resonances are, you make the various sounds. Now, of course, I mean, even though someone can play a flute and it can make it sound like a a human crying or speaking, you know, really nothing comes closer to what we have in our bodies. So, okay, now this is the relation between the mechanics and the acoustics. Okay, so how do we get out of the tank that moves this waterbed type of structure sound? So the way we link it is through resonances and through the acoustics of the simple resonator structure or more complex resonator structure. So now we can begin to understand how we get sounds out of the muscle motion, you know, because at the beginning all we have is muscle motion. Now, am I missing something? I mean, I have the vocal tract, I can make sound, but am I missing something? A very important component. Anybody playing a wind? Anybody's playing a wind instrument? What? You're missing the reed, the thing that excites the tube. Okay, so I'm missing the glottis. I mean, actually, for wind instruments, that's really what it's called. You know, the thing. And what is that? Well, essentially, I'm missing something that creates. It will take a static DC pressure that is produced between your lung and the outside environment and produce a periodic excitation that corresponds to your, I mean, I have a pitch, okay, and my pitch, you know, probably 50, 60 hertz, you know. Well, who produces that? Well, we have an instrument which is called the glottis, the vocal cords, which actually is a very sophisticated mechanical structure that actually takes the DC pressure that exists or that you create between the outside environment and the lungs and produce basically an oscillation. And that by itself is a very complicated topic. I think let's just put on the side for now, but it's something that is quite exciting, and it's something, it is, let me put it this way, the ultimate production of real sounds as we really speak them doesn't really occur in this idealized way, but actually occurs because of this very highly nonlinear interaction between the vocal cords and the vocal tract. So, we have all components now. We have something we have the oscillator that will excite actually the tube. We have the tube, we have the muscles that modulate the tube, and so now we can start making sounds and start propagating waves and start communicating with people. Because if we couldn't do that, we won't be able to communicate with each other. I mean, it is really, actually, it's remarkable what we do. So, I'll skip the vocal cords, even though I have a whole talk. Last year, we worked in a group to actually model the vocal cords and see how we can use them to do interesting things with them, including telling how old you are. We can actually, believe it or not, we can actually, based on the way your vocal cords work, we can actually tell your age. That's amazing, isn't it? And maybe I'll give you a website to go and do some experiment to see if you can guess the age of someone based on sounds that you hear. So, okay, so let's begin now to do a little bit more complicated analysis of the sounds we produce, okay, and their properties. So, the resonances of the vocal tract, we have a name for that, and that's called formants. I mean, so we have, and for different sounds, we have different formants, okay? So, if I were to go back to this picture, and I look at this picture, well, first of all, you probably will tell me that if I go above, let's say 4 kilohertz, everything looks the same. I mean, I get basically kind of regular resonances, you know, which is really, it's not exactly the same, you know, but more or less they look similar. But if I look at the first 2 or 3 resonances, okay, I can see distinct structures between E, E, A, O, U, okay? You guys see that? So let's agree, okay, based on these observations, you know, let's agree that really what matters is basically first, second, and third formant, okay? I mean, because we can actually see from experimental data that actually that is what it is. So a brilliant fellow named Barney with Patterson, which a colleague of his a while back, said, okay, let's create, let's take people, let's put them in a quiet room, and let's ask them to say, ah, oh, many people, E, U. Let's go make spectrograms of their production, find the formants, the resonances, F1, F2, F3, and then let's plot the formant resonances in a plot that basically plots F1 and F2, formant 2, okay? It's kind of a space that comprises of the first formant and the second formant. And what happens actually, they discovered that turns out that for many people, they did this, many, I don't know, maybe 20, I don't remember how many people they did this experiment, but something like 20 people, 30 people. They figure out that the resonances for all these people where they will have a mean location that is denoted by the asterisk, and they will have some variance in some dimension, and that's basically, so they look like ellipsoids. And so this is for U, A, E, and so on. So you can see that using this parameterization of the formant space, we can begin now to distinguish sounds, okay? There is actually, and not just for one person, because someone would say, well, my vocal tract is not the same as your vocal tract, clearly. But what we see here now is that in this experiment, this is the first time that basically it was understood that now there is kind of a universal representation of the formants in the acoustic space. This is really from the signal that actually can be used to do some things. Okay. In fact, if you see the original data, the way it's plotted, it looks like basically a palm. You know, you just you kind of put your palm and your fingers actually will correspond to the actually formant variances along different speakers. Now, actually, this is nice, but remember, this is someone taking you guys and going in the quiet room and tell you, say ah, and after you say 10 times, now they say 10 more times ah, and you do that, and that's it. Now, what if we go actually and we do this experiment? If we go spy on you, record your telephone conversation, maybe with your friends, you know, everybody in this room, you know, and then we come back and say, we analyze your speech, and we plotted your formant frequencies in this F1, F2 space, how would that be? Well, the way it's going to be is not going to be really nice and spaced out like this, but it's going to be like this. So this is idealized acoustics, production acoustics, and this is real life. What does it mean is that as you speak, and timid actually is not really speaking naturally. You actually had someone sit and read something, or is timid database for those who are familiar with that. You actually summon, it's a really controlled experiment. It's something between lecturing like now, where I basically co-articulate every other sound, you know, and all the live formats is going to be all mixed up, you know, and the Barney experiment. The point I'm trying to make is that And this is really the take-home message that I want to make by putting this up here. And by the way, this is really work from Terry Kam that we did actually in the workshop 1996, so 13 years ago, we had a workshop like you guys are here. This is work actually we did then and together. So the point to make here is that, sure, we can go and borrow from acoustics and understand how the system works, but actually at the end of the day, this idealized ways that we think of the system working is not so. Life is more complicated, is more noisy, so to speak. Things are not as clear as we think. So this is really where sophisticated mathematics, learning algorithms, and learning machines actually will allow us actually to really do things, in this more complex space of signals that we have actually when we actually do experiments. Any questions so far? Does this make sense? Okay. So let me, I don't know even how much time I have. So, let me see. What time is it, please? So how long we have? 35 minutes, okay. Okay, so I really wanted to spend a little more time focusing on the production and really what does it mean in terms of signal processing instead of the sound signals and all that, because that is something that we are important. Now, I'm going to go faster here because I believe, did Malcolm talk about perception, issue of perception? Did you guys have a lecture on that? I suppose you probably should or have had or will have. But let me summarize a few things so make sure that we actually at least have a baseline. So, again, as we communicate in human communication, the way we hear things is not really the way mathematics and signal processing actually will show things if you were to just analyze them and just say, well, you run some math, you run some analysis, and you get something. Is that really how we hear things or how we perceive things? The answer, no. And so this difference between the physical representation, such as frequency, and the perceived representation of the sound, okay? What does it mean, frequency, to you? I mean, I don't have somewhere something that measures 1 hertz, 2 hertz, 3 hertz. You don't have a metronome, that actually calibrates your ear, Of course, I mean, people are good at that, especially if you're playing an instrument, But, so, the difference between the physics and the perception of that quantity is really what I will call, what we'll define as the perceptual attributes of sounds. And in general, we have 3, okay? There are 3 general categories that we perceive sound. Loudness, which is perceived intensity. How loud is something? I mean, when you talk to your friends, you say, well, it's loud, it's louder, it's very loud, but you don't give a number. You don't say, well, it's 23 SPL, sound pressure level, in some absolute scale. The same as pitch, I mean, you say, when you hear someone speak like you say Okay, so which of us has a higher frequency, which among us, someone had a higher frequency than what you really perceive there is basically, but I don't know what's the frequency, but I can tell you what's higher, okay? So that is pitch, which is really perceived fundamental frequency as, and what does that depend? Who controls that? Your glottis, okay? So And finally, we talk about sound intensity, we talk about pitch, which is kind of frequency. Everything else that you don't know what it is about sound, we call it timbre. Okay? Really, literally, that's how we define timbre. Anything that is not either pitch or loudness is qualities of sound, you know. This is really what you tell the difference between a flute and a French horn, you know. I mean, they're winds, you know, but there's a big difference between the two instruments, you know, or and so timbre is a catch-all place where we put everything that we don't understand or we don't know. Let me quickly go through this. Yes?
Can you give an example for timbre for human speech?
Timbre for human speech. Cracked voice versus normal voice. Okay, I mean that's the most striking example I can think of. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, you hear an older person speak, you know, and you know, you can say that, you know, I mean, versus a young person, you know, there's actually a good point, and we looked at that last year. There's actually about 7 qualities of timbre-like characteristics for human voice. And if you're interested, I'll send you the reference. No, I mean, these are really qualities of speech which are really not quantifiable with any physical, I mean, because plosives and trundles, I mean, that I can actually put something on it, you know, I can characterize, but things that are not really characterizable, you know. I have a paper, it's got classical work, you know, where you really, is, you know, essentially what I would call the kind of the timbre representation of the speech sound, you know. This is my view. I mean, I think this is really how I see it. If you're a musician or a singer, you have probably different, much more defined views. But that's why I said timbre is something that everybody has a view, and it's something and it's good. You know, sometimes it's good to have things that we don't understand, and we don't try to put them in a category that make them be something. Just leave them in a category until we really have a better understanding of what they are. Anyway, so speaking of loudness. So it turns out actually the way we perceive the bottom line, what is the bottom line in loudness scale, the way we perceive loudness as humans has to do with frequency. So if I ask you, if I ask someone to make tell me play a complex sound and tell me how loud it is, you know, it's difficult because a complex sound will have multiple frequencies, okay? And so the loudness scale for humans looks something like this. So basically, this is sensitivity. So you're really very sensitive around 1,000 hertz, 2,000 hertz. Being down means you're very sensitive. Being up means you're not very sensitive. So it's something that varies from person to person, and it is a correlate of the sound intensity, and also it's a function of the integration time, how long you actually played the sound, okay? And that has to do with that, with the adaptation, and we have units for loudness. There are phones and zones. That's the loudness scale, and so the bottom line is that loudness, it is a scale that varies from person to person, but here's again where we have some things that we can associate with loudness. And so if you're somewhere like in an airport and the jet is right next to you at 100 meters, you're basically, you are on the top of the zone scale, which is about 1,000 zones, and that will basically correspond to about 120 micropascals. 120 dB relative to 120 micropascals, which is the level. So that's really as loud as you can get. And what's the, in terms of pascals, pressure, that's about 6 to 200. And as compared to, let's say, the most sensitive sounds that you can hear, which is something of the order of 2 times 10 to the minus 5. So this is really, this is a scale for loudness. Also putting next to it the absolute pressure for that sound. And there's a relation between son and phone, you know, which I have down there. This is from Wikipedia. So, this is actually very important. So the next perceptual scale that we talked about, that was of pitch, okay? And so for pitch, which is essentially the perception of frequency, okay? How do we perceive frequencies as humans? So, of a tone, of a pure tone. So the original work was done actually by Stevens and Volkmann in 1940. And what they did basically, they put them in a quiet room and they took the reference frequency of 1,000 hertz. And then they would present eep, and then they would present eep, and so on. And then they will ask them whether they will try to find out how well they would perceive the signal until it was twice the frequency, 10 times the frequency, and so on. You know, so by doing that, and by asking whether people could discriminate 1,000 hertz to 2,000 hertz, 1,000 hertz to 10,000 hertz, they actually produce a scale, okay? And that scale is called the Mel scale, and it's shown here. So on the x-axis is the absolute frequency, and on the y-axis is basically the Mels, the scale in Mels. And basically, what you can see here is that at low frequencies, you have ability to resolve sounds which are very close to each other. As the tone goes to higher frequency, you lose that ability. In other words, if I take, Damian knows you asked me why I like this. If I take from 500 hertz to 1,000 hertz, okay, and then I project here, that basically corresponds to something between 600 and 1,200 Mels. Now, if I take now from 2,000 to 4,000, which is really there and there, well, look, you know, I get basically the same thing, but now look at the width, this width here on the Mel scale is the same, but look at my width on my actual scale. I went basically from 2,000 to 4,000 hertz, and that only corresponds to 500 Mels, you know, difference on the Mel scale, which is the same as between 500 and 1,000 hertz. So basically what it tells, as we go to higher frequency, our ability to resolve tones close to each other, we lose that ability. Okay? You guys, you understand the Mel scale? This is really, it's very important actually. And it's very important because actually we use Mel scale, and I'll give the remainder of the talk, I will focus on some way that we've done that actually relates to Mel scale. Okay? So, in fact, we have a mathematical relationship that I have used to plot the data there. The frequency in the Mel scale is basically given by the log of 1 plus 5 over 700, and you have the prefactor 1 in front. So for low frequencies, For low frequencies, basically, you can expand this the log, and you get basically a linear function between. So basically, the bottom line is that for low frequencies, this you can assume that that's a line, that's a linear segment. Okay. The relationship is linear. There's a direct one-to-one correspondence between frequency and MEL, but as you go to high frequencies, that becomes more of a log function, a compressive function. Okay, now, if I were to now make filter banks that we actually will use, who is in the acoustic, who is in the ASR team? Who's going to be doing speech recognition? I guess Povich, is that, I mean, no, you guys don't know? Okay, yeah. So at some point, you're going to have a front end. We're going to be processing your data, and your front end, you're going to take the sound and break into filter, into frequency bands, and your front end is going to use a MEL scale, which is there, which as you plot it, basically, you can see now what you're going to see is that your filters become broader as you go to higher frequencies, and they are narrow as you are at lower frequencies. Why do we do that? Because we know that perceptually, the way we perceive sound, we are better at lower frequency at resolving the sound, so may as well put more filters there. And at higher frequencies, we basically are not good at that, so may as well make the filters very broad. Okay? Okay, well, this is really the simplified picture. Skip that. Let's skip this. Let's go to how many people know something about probabilities? About learning, machine learning. Okay, so let's go through this. So, okay, so I talked today about production. We talk about the vocal tract apparatus. We've always talked about how we have the formants, how the formants relate to the shape of the vocal tracts. How we have this tongue that actually controls all that, and we also talk about something seemingly very different, and that was something called MEL scale, okay? Now, is there a link between the two? Do you think? The answer there is, okay? And let's see what's the link between the two. To elucidate or to really make it clear what's the link, I'm going to use a couple extra examples from my work in ASR, and that is ASR stands for automatic speech recognition. Okay, so essentially you have a person, you go and buy a piece of software, Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is really probably the best system out there now. We used to have Jim Baker here at the center, who is the founder of that, and imagine that you can actually speak to the machine and the machine will understand, you know. I mean, that is really good, you know. I mean, and Dragon does a good job if you are speaking close, you know. I mean, how many people have an iPhone, you know? This is amazing that you can actually, there's a program called Lingo, and you can actually use Lingo. I use it actually. So that means that actually ASR has come to a point where it's a useful function. But why do you think it works so well on the iPhone? How many people have tried the iPhone speech interface? Okay, well, I should do a demo, you know. Yeah, so you go with Lingo and you bring up this interface and say, let's say, search and Google, and then Johns Hopkins University is thinking.
I have used it.
Well, let's see what it does. This is ASR. I'm just giving you an example of ASR. Well, hey, I'm not lying, okay? It gave back Johns Hopkins University thinking. Because actually, when I say it's thinking, actually it was still listening. No, seriously, I'm not lying. Now, this is remarkable. Actually, the fact that this works so well, I'm amazed. But what's the secret behind this? The secret behind this is that you have your microphone here, and you speak here, right there on the microphone, always at the same distance, at the same time. Forget about every other sound. Environment doesn't matter. Nothing matters. You have basically the microphone in your mouth, okay? And by doing that, actually, you get very, very robust acoustic signal to the iPhone. And I think, frankly, that's the secret why the iPhone works so well. This program works on the iPhone so well. So anyway, if you don't have an iPhone, and you're not going to put your microphone in your mouth to do that, and you want to really talking, I'm be able to listen in an environment like this, and transcribe my lecture, you're in trouble. And you have to do a little bit more than what they do in this program there. So let's see what is actually in this program, what is in this program lingo. So in general, basically you have some input, and you have some, this is your input data. You have some data that you have accumulated. That's your input signal. This is really some data that you have that you can use to help you make the machine. And you have basically a machine that takes the input, will take data, knowledge that's out there, and produce some models, So it produces knowledge that the machine will use now to really do recognition. And so in general, and this is really a very general description of what's going on, given X and Y, you want to really maximize probability of X, Y, given some models K row, and you really want to both, I don't talk about now learning the models, but actually assuming that you pick up the models, you want to really find the best parameters row of the models that actually will do the job. So this is really the process of learning. Of course, in that program, Google or whoever produced a program ran this process. When you really actually, when you're operating the system, you basically want to use the knowledge, put it back in the machine. The machine now is slightly different. This is a decoding machine. Have some input X, have an estimate Y, and basically you really, you want to produce a sequence of words. In that case is the words Johns Hopkins University thinking, that actually was the most likely sequence given the acoustic observations that the program heard, which is my speech sounds. And so this is sound, and that is words. Y is words. And you really want to find the best likely words, the most likely words given X as a sound. So this is really a very broad description of what's going on. It's much more complicated, of course. And in general, you actually have similar processes occurring at three different levels. At the transaction actuation, at the microphone level, actually, there is some very rudimentary function there doing gain control that makes sure that actually the machine learns your sound level. Otherwise, it will basically saturate your ADC, your analog to digital converter. At the feature level extraction, where you're actually taking the speech and producing numbers out of the speech, and you don't really do it. You don't just do an FFT, you do something much more sophisticated than that actually involves learning and models and knowledge. And finally, as you build the classifier, which is really the machine that I actually described there, where you actually have your numbers, your representation of the speech signal as X, as a vector X, that actually you have your knowledge and the machine that actually will take that representation and produce the sequence of words. Now, all of that happens on the iPhone, and all of this happens there by magic. Now, a few years ago, 1994, in the second of these workshops that you guys are attending, so that would be 15 years ago, Terry and myself and Jordi Cohen, and I'll put it in this schematic representation because I don't want to go in the complicated math and all that, just to give you a sense of what we did. What we said is the following. If K is a knowledge, it's some knowledge about how we produce speech, the vocal tract, And if rho is some parameters that relate to that knowledge, okay? We have a model, okay? And rho is a parameter. What could be a parameter? For example, the length of the vocal tract. L could be a parameter, okay? So you have a resonator is a knowledge and L is a parameter. So can we make a machine that can learn from the data, that parameter rho, and if we can do that, can we use it to really improve speech recognition? In other words, each individual here, as you remember from the resonant frequencies, have vocal tract which has different length, okay? This is really an idealization, okay? And in general, women have shorter vocal tract length than men, and children have even shorter vocal tract length than women. And that's why the 4 months, that's why actually you see now pitch 4 months being lower frequency and higher frequencies for children, men and women. Now, imagine that we don't know anything about who is speaking. Can we actually learn something about the vocal tract length? And if we can, then when someone's speaking, I don't want to make it men, women, or children. I want to, because men can actually have very short vocal tract lengths. Actually, that's what we're going to see in a bit. It's not really what I just said. It says, oh, okay, that's the obvious thing. But I don't want to do that. I want to really open. So can we do that? The answer is yes. And so this is a project that we did that year to really learn this parameterization, one parameter, and that's known as vocal tract normalization. Is used probably there because it's used in every recognizer out there. And so what does it do? Okay, well, I think I'm going to skip that. Let me start from here. You're going to learn. Professor Damianos is going to teach you plenty about how to make a speech organizer. Are you teaching this?
Actually, it's Zach. Zach will do it.
Zach will do it. Okay, Zach, Professor Zach. Who's Zach? Zach from. No, he's here? Oh, I see. Okay. Zach will do that. He will teach you how to make a speech recognition system. So I will not get to that. But let me actually tell you what's in the front, okay? And what's in the front is something that you take the signal, and for the purpose of this discussion, think of the signal as numbers, okay? You get 256 samples FFT. You take it, you do a fast Fourier transform, you analyze it, and you get 256 numbers. Now, because when you do FFT, you're going to keep the real part, you throw out the imaginary part, the 256 numbers become 128. You throw half of your numbers away because they're the same thing. Now you have 128 numbers to go to the machine, to go to my iPhone speech organizer. Now, at some point, you say, but out of these 128 bins, frequency bins, we know from perception, from the Mel scale, that we don't really need to have all 128 bins. We can actually bin them together. So what we do, we take the 128 numbers and make them 24. And we make them 24 by binning high frequency bins into broader bins. You guys follow what I mean? Like the Mel scale. Remember what I did in the Mel scale? I took little yellow lines and put them together, and I say, well, all of these correspond to 1 Mel, 1,000 Mel, okay? So we take 128, get 24. We take the log amplitude of those numbers. Then we get still 24 numbers because we haven't changed anything. And then we actually take the discrete cosine transform of that. So now we have these 24 numbers. We're going to do now a transformation and say, well, those numbers are not really in a very parsimonious way. We can actually kind of compress the representation, and we get basically 12 numbers plus energy, then we get 13 numbers, and then we say, well, now let's take the derivatives of these numbers and the derivatives of the derivatives, and at the end we get 39 numbers. So these are called Mel frequency Kepler coefficients, those 13 numbers, and the 13 and 13 are the derivatives and the derivatives of those coefficients. If you're going to build an ASR, your speech reorganizer, is going to start with these 39 numbers. It may not be 12, it may be 10, it may be 8, but the bottom line, this is really how you get the numbers. Now, at some point here, I threw away information. Where did I throw away information? I start with 128 numbers, and I only have at the end 13. Forget about the 13 plus 13 thing there. Well, you can say, well, you probably did throw information here. I would say probably not. Even though I reduced my numbers, my 256 numbers there were redundant, so I only, well, maybe I do throw information there, face information, But so every time I went like this, and basically I threw information away. Now, the thing that I'm going to focus now is that, did it cost me? Obviously, at the purple level, when I use the Mel scale, well, someone says use Mel scale and it works. And they did experiments and they figure out that it works, Why did it work? Well, I don't know, because everybody did it, and so far everybody's doing experiments and it works. Everybody's using it, and we're not going to do anything else. So I think that's one thing that I want you to remember, and because we're going to address that. And so this is really where we can say, well, can we see how this vocal tract thing relates to the Mel scale? Because I think at the end of the day it does. So essentially, what is vocal tract normalization is going to come now and do, it's going to try to adjust the Mel scale in the front end and make it a little bit more appropriate to a select group of people. That's kind of the insight, kind of trying to link, where I know it's not clear yet, but hopefully as we go on, you'll see. So what we want to do now is basically take this systematic variability that we see in the vocal tract and make it in the production apparatus of humans, learn parameters from it, and use it for speech recognition. So here is a key figure, and here is a parameterization. We said we know from production, from speech production, you remember the equation. Fn equals, the formal frequencies are related to some length of the vocal tract. And if I now can parameterize my lengths of the vocal tract as a parameter nu there, and I make nu 1, 1.1, and 0.8, okay, how does it change the signal? Well, this is really spectra. This is a spectrogram, which is really the frequency content of the speech signal, and this is time as it goes on. And where you actually see, have you guys seen spectra today? And formants in spectra? Okay, so you've seen pictures like this. I assume actually you've seen pictures like this. What I see now is that as I actually, this basically tells me how the sound of different people that have different vocal tracts will look in the spectrum domain if I actually change the length, okay? So what happens now is that if I go, the dark areas here are formants, and the evolution of the formant is a formant trajectory. And what I see now is that as I make my vocal tract shorter, the formants will go up, and you see they get expanded. And as I make my, let me use my pen. as I make my vocal tract longer, my performance frequency actually go down, okay? So now, we claim that if we can actually find, we take speech input, if we can actually estimate what is this transformation that actually correspond, what is the L of the individual speaker then, which translates to what is the basically new, what is this transformation new, then we can actually make our front end, our MEL scale basically kind of tuned to that particular person, okay? This is really what's happening here. Now, how do we do that? Well, much like when you do experiments, you do cheating experiments. So this is something that you're going to learn to do this summer. You have a hypothesis, you have some test data, you have some training data. What you're going to do, you're going to go and test your hypothesis and try, assuming that you know what the answer is, and see whether you actually could predict that without going to a formal evaluation cycle. So we actually, I think we're running out of time, so I'll skip the details here. But basically, we use some training paradigm to actually estimate the best parameter nu, and in an iterative process. I have the slides if you're interested in really trying to understand this. We can talk about it actually. Using the HTK tools that you'll be using, and I have these nice pictures. But let me skip the pictures and what actually happens. The mathematics of how it actions. This is really what we uncover. So we uncover after doing this cheating experiment that indeed, for all the data that we have in our data sets, in the large data set that we have, there was a best warping corresponding to the length of the vocal tract that gave the best performance. The way we plot this graph is basically how many speakers at this particular warping or corresponding vocal tract length gave the best performance. And what you can see here is something interesting. First of all, without knowing that in this world there is women and men, because we didn't have we didn't tag the data, we produce actually the best warpings that actually, some of them were below the standard warping and some of them were above the standard warping. Again, what is below and above mean? Below and above mean really relates to the breakpoint on the MEL scale. Remember we had an equation, there's a breakpoint somewhere there. That's where 1 plus f over 700. That breakpoint is really the 0 point. That means actually that, very interesting, the generic speech recognition machine that everybody was using that year was no good because it was right here, right in the middle. It was really meant to be best for both, but not good for any of them, okay? It was right here. So what do we actually, which is actually a remarkable result, This is really from the data. So we learn from the data what is the best warping. This is a cheating experiment saying, well, you've got something really interesting. I mean, actually, the first time we got this data, everybody said, well, this is amazing. How do our systems work? I mean, or conversely, if we do something very simple now, we can make our systems work much, much better, which this is really what we did for the remainder of the summer. That's why I bring that. So we actually, given that data, we went on and did full recognition experiments with training and test set, and essentially we went from 44% correct, 51% accuracy, from 46 to 51% accuracy, or the correct went down, which actually is about 5% improvement on this data set. This was switchboard. This was the hardest data set out there. It's believed that actually this experiment, it was one single experiment that yielded such an absolute increase in speech recognition and a large vocabulary speech recognition with just one idea, okay? I mean, of course, you can try 100 different things and improve, but just one idea actually, this is really, I guess it was a simple idea that had a big impact, just because we uncovered something that we didn't know before. So that is really the vocal tract normalization. I don't think I have time to really go on learning the MEL scale, which was something we did 5 years after this, or 3 years after that. But if you're interested, we can talk about it. I think 12 o'clock is where we live. Let me summarize, because I think this is a good point that ties production and recognition. So what we did today, we talk about production, how sounds are produced, how the resonances of the vocal tract controlled by the tongue gives a system that has very rich spectral components, the formants, and how formants interact. But also, what we saw, quickly, is that if we actually use just a little bit of knowledge of the physics of speech production, it can give us, together with very sophisticated, this is not trivial experiments, with sophisticated experiments in machine learning and algorithms to actually understand how to use that knowledge, we can actually get improvements in really automatic speech recognition, which is really an application that we care about here at the center, and so many of you are here to actually work on that. And so the take-home message is that don't take trivially the knowledge that you know, but try to really think about ways of using it to train better models and reduce the model parameters and have less variability in the model parameters. And this is really what happens here, okay? That is how this, that's how production and perception closes the loop. There's more of that. I just want to really just show this graph and I will finish. What turns out now, after we've done this experiment, we say, okay, we understand why this works. It really has to do with where the breakpoint of the MEL scale, because it's a nonlinear function there. We have a nonlinear function, we have a parameter in that nonlinear function. That is really the 700 frequency parameter. Effectively, what we're doing at the end of the day is changing that number. Now, why are we using a MEL scale? Can we find what is the optimal scale for doing recognition? Give us data. Because Stevens and Volkmann 44 said this is really what you should be using, why should we be using it? Can we do something better? So we actually make an experiment. This is really again about machine learning. We created a million recognizers, each recognizer trained and recognizing with a different MEL scale. Okay, so we actually made 1 million different MEL quotation scales, And after we did these experiments, we look at the best performance of these recognizers. So the recognizers did not have fixed MEL scale, but actually they were parameterized. And so basically, if we take both the male and the female population, the best what is that? 32. The best 32 machines were the machines actually that are shown with the blue, and the MEL scale is basically the black line. Now, this is really male and female. What happens when it was just female? Oops. I don't have this slide, but when it was only females, turns out that the optimal MEL scale for female has nothing. It doesn't have the nonlinearity that we see here, but it's more of a linear scale. That's why it's called MEL scale, because it corresponds to males, So, so it turns out that there is a psychophysical scale which is really kind of different for females than for males. And so the way males and females, what we discover actually here is that perceived sound is actually, nobody has actually gone and do the experiments to really understand it a little bit better, but in slightly different ways. So anyway, but at least machines can tell the difference, and they really like to see a different scale. So where is the end? This is the end. So these are really good reading materials and journals. O'Shaughnessy is an excellent book if you're interested in audition and speech processing. It has excellent references in production, also perception and signal processing. The Parsons, it's an old book, Voice and Speech Processing. Again, an excellent book. O'Shaughnessy actually has a new edition, which is a little bit more mathematical than the old version. I like the old version better. I think it's just a little bit more DSP oriented, the new edition. And then, of course, transactional signal processing, JASA, and speech communication. So these are really the journals that you'd be really looking, and the corresponding conferences. So that's it.